He whispered a name no one else remembered, and the dog began to cry. Harold wasn't looking to adopt. He had already buried his best friend a year ago, along with the part of his heart that still believed in miracles. But that morning, as he knelt before a trembling golden retriever, no one could touch something changed. When he softly said, "Cooper," the dog's tail moved. Then his eyes filled with tears. And what happened next? It brought an entire town to its knees. Willow Creek, Oregon, early autumn. 6:45 a.m. Fog drifted across the sleepy town of Willow Creek, like soft breath over glass. It wrapped itself around porch railings coiled beneath the wheels of parked cars and blurred the outlines of street signs. The leaves had just begun to turn a gentle rebellion of gold and crimson against the fading green of summer. The air smelled faintly of damp bark and wood smoke, the quiet kind of morning that only a small Oregon town could hold. Harold Bennett, 72, moved along the narrow sidewalk with a rhythm born of habit. He wore a forest green overcoat over a faded flannel shirt, corduroy pants, and worn brown shoes that creaked slightly with each step. His tall frame had grown a little stooped with age, and his face lined deeply from years of laughter. Teaching and lately sorrow held a distant, quiet dignity. Wisps of white hair peeked out beneath a wool cap, and his breath hung briefly in the morning air like a ghost before vanishing. Every morning for the past 11 months, Harold had made this walk, not for exercise and not for duty. He did it because he didn't know what else to do with the silence. The house he once shared with his wife, and later with his dog Cooper, had grown too quiet after Cooper vanished. It had been an accident, at least, that's what people said, but that didn't make the leash in Harold's hand any lighter when he came home alone that day. The Willow Creek Animal Shelter sat at the edge of town, nestled behind a grove of aspens and a rusted metal fence. It was small and aging with chipped blue paint, and a hand-lettered sign that swung slightly in the wind. The gravel path crackled beneath Harold's steps as he pushed open the gate. From the porch, a familiar voice greeted him. "Morning, Mr. Bennett." It was Tyler Reyes, the shelter's head caretaker. Tyler was in his mid-20s with an athletic build and the kind of perpetual 5 o'clock shadow that made him look like he never fully finished waking up. He wore a Willow Creek shelter hoodie, the sleeves shoved up to his elbows, and a beanie pulled down over shaggy black hair. A warm smile played on his lips, easy and genuine. Tyler had been at the shelter for 3 years, and though his words were few, they always felt sincere. He had a quiet patience with animals, a skill Harold respected more than he said. "Morning, Tyler," Harold replied, offering a brief nod. Still standing barely. Tyler chuckled. "We've got a new vet today. You'll probably meet her in a bit." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Vet, I thought you were our vet." Tyler smirked. "I'm your poop scooper." She's got the letters after her name. They exchanged a look, half joke, half understanding. Tyler held the door open, and Harold stepped inside. The shelter smelled like it always did, a mix of antiseptic damp straw and that soft animal musk that Harold had grown to associate with comfort. Kennels lined the hallway, some empty, others occupied by dogs of all sizes. Morning feeding had begun, and low whines and barks filled the space like a song on repeat. Harold walked the familiar route toward the end of the corridor past the cleaning closet, the break room, and the old corkboard covered in adoption photos. And then he paused. 5th kennel on the right. Empty. It had been empty since the day he first volunteered. The metal bars were still there, still clean, still cold. The tag, once bearing the name Cooper, had faded to nothing. Tyler had offered to take it down. Harold had said no, just in case. He lingered there for a moment, fingers brushing the latch. The kennel was like a ghost, silent and visible, but always present. Footsteps approached. "You must be Mr. Bennett," said a woman's voice. Harold turned. Dr. Madison. Keene. 33 stood at the end of the corridor with a clipboard tucked under one arm. She had a tall, athletic build, and the posture of someone used to control, head high, shoulders square. Her strawberry blonde hair was tied back in a no-nonsense bun, and her hazel eyes scanned Harold with a hint of cautious curiosity. She wore dark jeans and a fleece-lined jacket over her scrubs, and there was a soft confidence in her voice. Measured, deliberate, Madison had only recently moved to Willow Creek, escaping a career in a high-end Portland clinic that had burned her out with long hours, corporate pressure, and too many patients she was never allowed to care about properly. Here in this forgotten corner of Oregon, she hoped to find purpose again, not just as a vet, but as a person. "I'm Madison, just started today." "Tyler said you're our most loyal volunteer." Harold gave a tired smile. "Only because I'm too stubborn to quit." Madison looked past him, her eyes lingering on the empty kennel. "Was that?" Harold nodded once slowly. His name was Cooper. Golden Retriever disappeared last October. I keep telling myself he'll walk back in one day. Silly old man's fantasy. Madison didn't correct him. Instead, she said softly, "I've seen stranger things." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the shelter bustling around them, but inside that moment, time felt still. Harold adjusted his cap, clearing his throat. "Well, I'd better get started on bowls. Welcome to Willow Creek. Dr. Keene." She smiled, faint but real. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I think I'm going to like it here." Harold turned and walked toward the supply room, his boots echoing lightly down the hall. Behind him, Madison glanced once more at the empty kennel, then back to her clipboard, and somewhere beneath the hum of fluorescent lights a new story had already begun. The morning continued with the steady rhythm of routine bowls, cleaned fresh water, poured dry food, scooped and shared among the kennels. But something in the air at Willow Creek Animal Shelter felt different. Maybe it was the low-hanging fog, still clinging stubbornly to the treetops outside, or perhaps the way the new veterinarian moved with silent focus through the building, taking in every detail like it might unravel a story no one else had noticed. By the time Harold Bennett returned to the kennel corridor with an armful of clean bedding, Tyler Reyes was standing by the intake desk with a clipboard, gesturing toward the rear wing where the isolation kennels were kept. A quiet exchange passed between him and Dr. Madison Keene, now dressed in a full set of pale gray scrubs beneath her fleece jacket, her hair pulled tighter into its bun than before. "There's one in the back you should see," Tyler murmured when Harold approached. "Came in last night, Golden Retriever, no tag, no chip, malnourished, trembling so bad he could barely stand, wouldn't let anyone near him, even the transport staff. We put him in ISO 2. Harold's breath hitched, Golden Retriever. Tyler gave a slow nod. "We're calling him Buddy for now." Madison looked up from the chart she held. "I haven't done a full exam yet. Wanted to give him a few hours to adjust. Poor guy's terrified of everything, including the light." Harold hesitated, his eyes flicking between them. "Mind if I just have a look?" Madison studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "Keep your distance. Let him come to you if he will. He hasn't shown any signs of aggression. Just panic." They walked together down the back corridor where the air grew noticeably cooler. The isolation wing was quieter than the rest of the shelter, designed to be a space of healing for animals too fragile for the main floor. The concrete walls were unadorned, the lighting deliberately dimmed. It felt more like a hospital than a kennel. Outside ISO 2. The only sound was the occasional scrape of claws against metal. Madison moved to unlock the observation window, then stepped aside so Harold could see inside. The Golden Retriever lay curled tightly into the corner of the enclosure, his back pressed against the concrete wall. His fur was the pale color of wheat left too long in the sun, dull and matted with grime. His tail was tucked flat beneath his hind legs, and his ribs showed clearly beneath the thinning coat. One paw had a wrapped gauze dressing from transport, likely a cut or scrape during capture. But it was his eyes that made Harold's stomach twist. They were wide and glassy with fear, darting at every sound, every flicker of motion. He looked younger than Cooper, maybe 4 or 5 years old, but something in the curve of his ears, the slope of his brow, the anxious flick of his nose as he sniffed the air. It all struck Harold with a strange familiarity. Harold crouched slowly beside the glass, careful not to move too fast. His joints groaned in protest, but he kept his eyes locked on the dog. "Hey there, buddy," he whispered. "It's okay. You're safe now." The dog didn't respond. Harold shifted a little closer. His voice, soft. "Cooper, is that you?" Madison, who had been checking a vitals chart nearby, froze mid-step. Inside the kennel, the dog's ears twitched. His head lifted slightly, just enough to see Harold. And for a second, barely more than a breath, everything paused. The tension in the animal's body seemed to melt just slightly. His shoulders lowered. His breathing slowed. Then, to Madison's astonishment, the dog let out a soft, almost imperceptible whine. His eyes shimmered. Not just with fear now, but with something achingly close to recognition. Harold's heart pounded in his chest. The dog didn't rise, didn't move closer, but his eyes never left Harold's face. Madison approached quietly. That was the first response he's given anyone. Harold didn't say anything. His throat was too tight. He simply pressed his hand against the glass palm open. In the corner, the dog shifted again, then slowly, gingerly began to uncurl from his defensive posture. His body moved with the stiffness of trauma and exhaustion, but he came forward 2 tentative steps, just close enough to sniff at the edge of the door. "That's not nothing," Madison whispered. "That's a beginning." Behind them, a voice called from the hall. It was Elsie Donahue, the shelter's part-time receptionist and an old friend of Harold's. She was in her late 60s, petite and wiry with springy gray curls. She kept tied back in a blue bandana. Elsie had a voice like gravel and a temper sharper than her knitting needles. But a heart so soft she once rescued a goose with a broken wing and built it a pond in her backyard. "Harold, phone call for you. Some guy from Portland says he might have info on a missing retriever. Wanted someone to check their shelter records from last year." Harold blinked in surprise and stood brushing dust from his knees. Portland Elsie shrugged. "Said he found a note about a transfer never logged. Might be nothing." Madison exchanged a glance with Harold. "I can check the medical logs while you take the call. We keep backup reports in the vet files." Harold gave the dog one last look before following Elsie back down the hall. Madison stepped closer to the kennel watching, as the dog sniffed the air where Harold had crouched. She scribbled a note on her clipboard, then crouched slowly herself. "You're not just scared," she murmured. "You're waiting for someone." The air outside had warmed slightly, but inside Willow Creek Animal Shelter, the cool hum of the old ventilation system made the concrete floors feel colder than before. Afternoon sunlight slipped through the narrow windows in thin shafts, catching dust motes mid-drift like tiny fireflies trapped in time. Somewhere near the front lobby, a bell jingled faintly as the door opened and closed. Perhaps a delivery or another volunteer, but Harold didn't notice. He was sitting alone in the break room, fingers wrapped around a paper cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The events of the morning had stirred something in him, something buried deep under 11 months of quiet ache. He stared at the cup, his thoughts adrift until Madison entered carrying a folder of intake charts and lab requisition slips. "Got a moment?" she asked. He nodded, pushing aside the cup as she sat across from him. Her brow was slightly furrowed, the same way it had been earlier when she knelt by the kennel. She didn't say anything at first, just opened the folder and placed it on the table between them. "I pulled our intake logs from the past 2 years," she began. No matching identifiers on that dog, no chip, no collar, not even a scar pattern listed in any of our recent notes. But there's something I want to check. Harold looked up. Madison tapped the top form. We still have his blood sample. I'd like to run a mitochondrial DNA comparison against Cooper's old vet records, assuming you still have them. He blinked, as if waking from thought. Yes. I kept all of it. His adoption papers, vaccination cards, even his puppy picture from the first vet visit. He managed a faint smile. My wife, Elaine, used to make albums for everything. Madison nodded. Bring them in tomorrow. I'll handle the lab coordination. I'm not saying this is your dog, Mr. Bennett. But I've seen stranger things come true. Harold's eyes dimmed again, returning to the past. I still remember the leash slipping from my hand. He said quietly, October 14th. We'd just passed the bakery and Cooper saw a calico cat dart across the street. I called out, but he lunged, snapped the clip right off before I could stop him. He trailed off. Madison waited. There was a screech of brakes, the sound of a horn, then the thud. She didn't speak, just listened. I ran to him. He was breathing, but barely. Blood on his side, his eyes open, but not seeing me. I shouted for help. A young man stopped, said he knew someone who worked animal rescue. He promised to get Cooper to a clinic. I let them take him. I didn't even get their names. He paused, swallowing against the weight in his throat. Next morning, I called every vet clinic within 50 miles. Nothing. No record, no intake log. It was like he disappeared off the map. Did you contact animal control? Madison asked softly. Harold nodded. Twice. They claimed no report had been filed that day. Even the bakery's security cam turned out it was broken. Cooper was gone. Madison leaned back slightly, processing. He could have been transported. If someone didn't log the transfer properly, it's rare, but it happens. Especially if the receiving shelter isn't licensed to take strays, but does it under the radar. She flipped a page in the folder. I already emailed Dr. Lynn, my contact at the Portland Recovery Network. She's checking last fall's gray zone transfers. Meantime, I want to document every identifying mark Cooper had. Harold exhaled slowly. He had a crescent-shaped birthmark on his chest. Left side looked like a half moon and a chipped lower tooth. He cracked it, chewing on the table leg when he was 2. Elaine never let me fix it. Said it made him look mischievous. Madison smiled slightly, then stood. I'll check, buddy, for both. Discreetly, she left the room. Harold remained staring at the place where the folder had been. Out in the hallway near the isolation wing, a new volunteer knelt beside Kennel 7. Caleb was 17, gangly and sunburned with a mop of curly red hair and oversized wireframe glasses. A junior at the local high school, he had joined the shelter for extra credit and stayed because he claimed animals got him better than people. He moved slowly and spoke gently, always making sure to ask permission before petting even the friendliest dog. "Hey, big guy," Caleb whispered to a one-eyed terrier mix named Moose. "I brought you the good stuff. Don't tell the others." He fed the treat through the bars, then glanced down the hall where Madison was now quietly unlatching ISO 2. She stepped inside, slowly clipboard under one arm. The dog still called Buddy by everyone, but Harold lay curled in the same corner head, resting on crossed paws. He watched her cautiously but didn't flinch. "All right," she murmured, crouching beside him. "Let's see what secrets you're keeping." She moved with slow precision, brushing back the fur on his chest. And there it was, a crescent-shaped patch of pale skin beneath the golden strands. Not quite visible unless you were looking for it. Her fingers moved gently to his mouth. The dog stiffened but didn't growl. She tilted his snout slightly, checking the lower canines. A chip. She blinked. Lower right. Clean crack, half worn from age. Madison exhaled. Not yet confirmation, but close. Very close. From behind her, Caleb spoke up. "Hey, Dr. Keene." She turned. "I think Moose chewed through his collar again. Tyler said to ask you about replacements." Madison stood nodding. "Thanks. Caleb, I'll check the storage." She left the kennel, but paused to write something on the clipboard before shutting the door. Left chest crescent, lower right. Chip, possible match. As she walked back toward the office, she passed Harold, who was staring out the front window, lost in thought. "There's more than coincidence here," she said quietly. Harold didn't turn, but she saw his hand curl slightly at his side. The rain came late in the afternoon, slow at first, then heavier, drumming softly against the windows of Willow Creek Animal Shelter. The scent of wet earth and pine filtered in through the narrow vents, mingling with the low hum of the heater, and the occasional bark from the main kennel block. The fog from morning had lifted, but the sky remained low and gray, as if the day itself was reluctant to reveal too much at once. In the office, Dr. Madison Keene sat hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen lighting the concern etched into her features. A stack of intake reports sat to her left, a steaming mug of coffee. Her third of the day sat forgotten to her right. On her screen was a document marked Confidential Transfer Record, Oregon Animal Welfare Archive. Her brow furrowed as she reread the entry for the fourth time: male golden retriever, approx. 4 to 6 years. Unnamed, transferred from unauthorized private residence near Bend, Or. Signs of overbreeding behavioral trauma. No chip intake date, 11/02. She tapped her fingers against the desk. The dates aligned too well with what Harold had told her. But what truly caught her eye was the red flag note. Possible backyard breeder. Flagged, but unprosecuted due to lack of ownership proof. She clicked the name tied to the intake, Martin Cleary. It wasn't a name she recognized. She cross-referenced it with the Oregon Veterinary Network, the volunteer foster system, even the town permit database. Nothing official, but in a local online forum for shelter workers, the name came up. One comment read, "Cleary's, the guy who rescues purebreds off the books and sells their litters. Last we heard he moved south after a neighbor reported him for having 10 dogs in his barn." Madison exhaled slowly. It wasn't evidence, but it was more than suspicion now. She stood and pulled her jacket from the back of the chair. As she passed the hallway, she paused outside ISO 2, peeking through the narrow window. Inside, the golden retriever, still officially listed as Buddy, lay on his mat chin, resting between his paws. But his posture had changed since his arrival. He no longer trembled, his ears no longer lay flat against his skull. And today, for the first time, he had accepted food directly from someone's hand. That someone was Harold Bennett, who sat just outside the kennel, cross-legged on the floor, a hardcover book open in his lap. Harold had been coming in every afternoon carrying one of Elaine's old books. He would read aloud, sometimes fiction, sometimes poetry, and the dog would listen. Not actively, not in the sense that he understood the words, but he would lift his head. He would blink. He would inch closer until his paws nearly touched the bottom bars of the gate. Today's book was Leaves of Grass. Harold's voice was low and rhythmic, textured with time. "I think I could turn and live with animals. They are so placid and self-contained." He paused, letting the sentence linger in the air. The dog raised his head slightly. "Walt Whitman," Harold said softly. "Elaine used to say he was the only poet who truly loved the world, even when it didn't deserve it." He closed the book gently. "You remind me of her sometimes," he said to the dog. "Same eyes, same quiet strength." From the doorway, Madison watched for a moment longer, then stepped inside. "He's doing better," she said. Harold looked up. "He's still skittish but not scared. There's a difference." Madison knelt beside him. "I've been looking into where he might have come from. There's a man." Martin Cleary linked too. Off-the-record dog transfers. If this dog is Cooper, he may have been taken, kept, and used. His scars, his stress reactions, they're consistent with forced breeding. Harold's jaw clenched. That would explain the way he flinches at sudden movement. Madison continued. And why he doesn't bark? Dogs like him learn silence, it's safer. Can he recover from that? Harold asked. Yes, she replied, but it'll take time and consistency I've got. Both, Harold said. They sat in silence for a few moments until the quiet was broken by the sound of the front door opening. A voice called out bright and matter-of-fact. Anyone here need a delivery? Signed, Sandra Lynn. The town's regular UPS courier appeared in the hallway. She was in her early 40s, strong-built and sun-browned, with her black hair tied back in a short ponytail, and the kind of grounded attitude that came from raising 3 kids and managing 2 jobs. She carried 2 packages, one under each arm and a scanner wedged between her teeth. Tyler appeared from the office and waved. Sandra, you're a lifesaver. That should be the new heat pads for the recovery cages. She nodded and turned to Harold. Hey, Mr. B, haven't seen you down at the diner lately. Harold gave her a small smile. Haven't had the appetite. Working on it? Sandra gave him a thumbs up and disappeared down the hall. Once the door clicked shut again, Madison stood. There's more, she said. I requested the records from the Bend Animal Welfare Board. If we can prove this dog was transferred without proper protocol and that Cooper's case matches, I might be able to push for a formal investigation. But that won't change what he's been through. Harold looked through the kennel bars. The dog was now resting with his head facing them, one eye half open. No, Harold said, but it'll mean someone was held accountable. Even if just on paper, Madison hesitated, then added, I'll also start the DNA test today, just in case. As she walked back to her office, she passed Caleb, who was refilling water bowls. The teenager gave her a thumbs up without speaking. He had become oddly protective of Buddy, often sitting near the kennel after his shift, playing quiet music through his headphones and letting the dog grow used to his presence. In that strange symphony of subtle gestures, read aloud poetry, quiet water bowls, science, and silence. Something fragile was starting to rebuild. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. The following Tuesday morning began with a clarity that hadn't touched Willow Creek in weeks. Rain had washed the town clean the night before, and now golden sunlight spilled across the rooftops, warming dew-covered lawns and glinting off car windows. The shelter's small gravel parking lot gleamed beneath the light, and inside something was different. Not in the air, but in the way people walked, how their voices carried. Madison Keene arrived just after 7, a manila envelope tucked tightly beneath one arm. She wore her usual navy fleece jacket, dark jeans, and her hair in a quick braid that swept over one shoulder. Her stride was brisk, not rushed, but purposeful, in a way that even Tyler noticed when she passed the front desk. You look like someone who's about to make a grown man cry, he said, glancing up from the adoption papers he was organizing. Madison allowed herself a grin. That's the plan. She moved through the corridor and found Harold exactly where she knew he'd be sitting outside ISO 2, reading aloud from Of Mice and Men. His voice steady but soft, with a reverence that made even the simplest lines feel sacred. The golden retriever on the other side of the kennel bars lay curled with his chin over his paw's tail, thumping lightly whenever Harold reached a particularly familiar cadence. Hey, Madison said gently, can we talk? Harold turned, brows lifted. He stood slow and deliberate and followed her to the office. Once the door was closed, Madison placed the envelope on the desk and slid it toward him. He stared for a moment. Is this? She nodded. DNA confirms it. There's a 98% match between the mitochondrial strands. This dog buddy is Cooper. Harold sank into the chair behind him. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't blink. Then his hand rose to his mouth and he let out a sound. A quiet gasp, equal parts disbelief and relief. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew Madison sat across from him. We still need to complete formal steps to transfer custody, but Tyler and I have already pulled the paperwork. There won't be any resistance." Harold looked down at his hands, then up again. "You're sure?" "I'm absolutely sure." Outside, a bark rang out from the back hallway, followed by a squeaky toy being launched across the floor. Caleb was likely doing enrichment rounds again. He'd started bringing a bag of toys from home every shift, now saying it helped the nervous ones settle. His favorite was a rubber donut he claimed could fix any dog's day. Madison rose, retrieved a small adoption packet from the filing cabinet, and returned to the table. "We'll still keep him under observation for a week just to monitor behavior," she said. "But after that, he's yours. Officially." Harold let out a breath. He hadn't realized he'd been holding for 11 months. His voice trembled. "Thank you, Madison, for not brushing this off as the ramblings of an old man." "You're not an old man," she said with a soft smile. "You're a miracle magnet." By lunchtime, word had already spread beyond the shelter. Elsie Donahue, always faster than any official bulletin, told the news to the barista at Maple Hollow Cafe, who passed it to the mailman, who repeated it to the librarian. By 2 in the afternoon, people had begun arriving at the shelter with donations: dog treats, leashes, chew toys, blankets. A few simply came to stand outside and watch. At 4 o'clock, Mayor Gwen Holloway appeared. She was in her mid-50s, short and robust, with a red pixie cut and a laugh that carried half a block. She wore a bold, floral dress under a peacoat and carried a clipboard in one hand, a bag of tennis balls in the other. "You know," she said, placing the bag on the reception counter, "I was going to wait until the town council meeting, but screw it. This is the kind of story that deserves sunshine." Tyler raised a brow. "Sunshine. A celebration," she said. "Something public." Harold and Cooper's reunion is exactly what this town needs. With your permission, we'll set something up this weekend. A small parade, local press, maybe even a food truck or two. Madison looked amused. "Mayor Holloway, that sounds excessive." "It's joyful," Gwen corrected. "Don't stand in the way of joy." Dr. Keene. She left with a wave and a trail of good mood behind her. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the shelter quieted, Madison found Tyler leaning against the back door, sipping a soda and watching the trees. "She's serious, you know," he said. "I know. She's already called the radio station." Madison smiled, leaned on the doorframe beside him. "I'm just glad he's going home." Tyler nodded. "And you? What about me? You've been here a while now, starting to feel like home." She paused more than I expected. A moment passed, then Tyler added, "I've been meaning to ask. There's this community outreach program I've been trying to reboot called Save One, Save Yourself. It pairs animals with trauma survivors, usually kids or veterans. The old vet used to co-lead it before she retired. I'd like to bring it back. Thought maybe you'd want in." Madison turned to him. "That's the reason I got into this work. Count me in later," as Harold sat beside Cooper. "No more." Buddy now in the quiet of the kennel, he read one final poem aloud, one Elaine used to love. "And when the light returns, may you still be waiting, a heart unbroken by the dark." The dog rested his head in Harold's lap, and Harold, for the first time in almost a year, felt entirely whole again. The morning after the town-wide celebration, Willow Creek settled into a quieter rhythm. The banners had come down, the streamers swept from the sidewalks, but the warmth lingered. Even the sky seemed a little lighter, and the morning air carried a peace that wasn't there before, like the town itself had exhaled. At the edge of town, in a modest, single-story house with white siding, and an overgrown hydrangea bush out front, Harold Bennett stirred cream into his coffee and glanced over at Cooper, who lay curled in a patch of sunlight near the fireplace. The dog's fur caught the light in gold wisps, and for a moment Harold saw the pup he had raised all over again. But peace, like all things, came in fragments. It had been 3 nights since Cooper came home, and each one had ended the same way. Sometime past midnight, Harold would wake to the sound of whimpers, soft at first, then sharp. Cooper legs twitching would be trapped in some invisible nightmare. His body, frozen eyes wide but unseeing. Harold never rushed. He would sit beside him, stroke the space between Cooper's eyes and speak softly. "You're home now, buddy. You're safe." And eventually Cooper would settle again, pressing his body close, sighing through his nose like the air itself was learning how to rest. On this morning, Harold placed the coffee mug on the table and walked over. Cooper's eyes opened lazily and he lifted his head. The fear that once lived in those eyes was dimmer, now replaced with something quieter. Wary trust, ready for a walk. Harold asked. The leash, once a symbol of trauma, now sat folded by the door. Cooper didn't flinch when Harold picked it up, though his tail gave only the smallest twitch. That was enough. The two made their way down the path that led behind the house toward a meadow, once Cooper's favorite place to run as a pup. Meanwhile, across town, Dr. Madison Keene stood inside a small brick building, tucked between the public library and a bakery that always smelled of cinnamon and yeast. The building had been vacant for nearly a year until Madison signed the lease last week. A modest shingle now hung over the door, heart to paw, behavioral and emotional care for animals. Inside, the space was bright and airy. One wall had been painted a calming sage green with paw print stencils stretching in an arc over a bookshelf filled with journals, guides, and notebooks worn from years of use. A bulletin board beside it read, "Coming soon. Fear-free techniques. Animal. PTSD, human, animal, bonding therapy." This place, this dream had once been mocked by her ex-husband, who dismissed it as sentimental fluff. Madison had walked away from it then, but now, as she unpacked a box of clickers and calming collars, she felt something return to her. Not just the tools of the job, but the sense of why she'd started. The door jingled. It was Claire Whitmore, a local school counselor in her mid-40s with a sharp chin, short blonde curls, and an ever-present pair of lavender-tinted glasses. Claire had always been matter-of-fact, but beneath that exterior was someone deeply empathetic, someone who had seen what trauma did to kids and who believed animals often healed what therapy couldn't reach. "You actually did it," Claire said, smiling as she stepped inside. Madison laughed. "Still smells like paint. But yes." Claire walked to the table and picked up a flyer. "You're offering trauma sessions for pets and humans. Mostly pets, rescue dogs, anxiety cases. But if it helps people too—" She trailed off, then shrugged. "Why not?" Claire's gaze softened. "I've got 2 students I want to refer already. One lost her dad, the other's parents divorced during lockdown. They don't talk to adults, but they listen to animals." Madison nodded. "Send them next week. I'll be ready." Back in the meadow, Harold watched as Cooper explored the grass nose to the ground. His movements were slow, cautious, but no longer stiff. When a squirrel darted up a tree nearby, Cooper turned his head not to chase, just to observe. That alone was a victory. They passed Marla Jenkins, a retired florist with a garden hat 3 sizes too big and a wheelbarrow full of chrysanthemums. She lived just down the road and had known Harold for years. Short, round, and as opinionated as she was, kind, Marla waved her gloved hand. "Is that our Cooper?" She called. Harold smiled in the flesh. Marla walked closer, crouched a bit as she approached the dog. "You remember me. Sugar Cooper." Sniffed her hand tail, wagging. Once I'll take that as a yes." Marla beamed. Later that day, Harold visited the shelter for the first time since Cooper's return. It wasn't obligation, it was instinct. The rhythm of those days, the silence of the hallways had worked their way into his life. Tyler greeted him with a mock salute. "Missing us?" "Already." "Something like that," Harold said. Brought a few old blankets, thought the pups might like them. He spent an hour helping Caleb sort food bins and tossing a ball for Moose, the one-eyed terrier. Then he sat beside a new dog, Luna, a shy border collie with black and white fur like wind-blown ink. Luna had been rescued from a hoarding case and barely lifted her head in days. But today, when Harold knelt, she looked up just briefly and let him touch her paw. "Small steps," he whispered. Madison arrived later in the afternoon, her expression lighter than usual. "You're glowing," Tyler teased. "I opened the clinic," she said. "It's real now. You deserve it." She turned to Harold. "You and Cooper should come by next week. I'd like to document his progress for my first case study." Harold nodded. "If he's not too busy teaching the squirrels how to stay still." Everyone laughed, even Madison. And for a brief moment the past no longer weighed so heavily. That night, Cooper slept through until dawn. No whimpers, no tremors. Harold didn't sleep much. He sat on the edge of the bed and watched the rise and fall of his dog's chest, the way the room glowed soft with morning light. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Willow Creek shimmered under a pale autumn sun as the town gathered for its first-ever Rescue Day festival, an event conceived by Mayor Gwen Holloway in her usual whirlwind fashion and embraced wholeheartedly by the community. The town park had been transformed overnight into a patchwork of booths. Banners and laughter tables lined the walkways, offering homemade treats, hand-knitted dog sweaters, and leashes with quirky slogans. Children darted between hay bales and balloon stands, while the air smelled of kettle corn, pine needles, and the sharp sweetness of apple cider. At the heart of it all, just beneath the old oak that had once shaded summer weddings and 4th of July picnics, stood a small raised platform. A handwritten sign read, "Stories that Save Lives. Hear How They Came Home." The crowd gathered slowly with folding chairs and picnic blankets unfurled on the grass. Some came for the music, some for the pets, but most came for the story. Cooper lay calmly by, Harold's feet, his coat brushed to a soft sheen, and a red bandana tied loosely around his neck. Though he still flinched at loud applause or fast movements today, he held himself with quiet pride, sitting close to Harold Tail, tapping gently against the wood with each breeze. Harold wore his best flannel shirt and freshly polished boots. His silver hair was combed neatly, but his hands trembled slightly as he held the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, familiar ones like Marla Jenkins with her garden gloves tucked into her purse, and strangers with curious eyes and leashed puppies at their feet. He cleared his throat. "I'm not much for speeches." He began, but I am very familiar with silence. A soft murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. When I lost Cooper last year, it was like someone had unplugged the world. It got quiet. In a way you don't notice until the sound never comes back. He paused, resting a hand on Cooper's head. I thought I'd never see him again. Thought I'd lost the last part of my life that still moved. Behind him, Madison stood just off stage, arms crossed, listening with eyes that shone under the brim of her cap. She wore a beige blouse tucked into jeans, and on her wrist was a leather bracelet engraved with the initials H2P, Heart to Paw. Harold continued. But sometimes the world has plans bigger than ours. Sometimes the one you lose comes back, not just to be found, but to help you find something in yourself again. A hush fell as he told the story of the accident. The empty days, the faintest thread of hope that pulled him to the shelter. He spoke not in drama, but in truth, with the cadence of a man who had spent his whole life teaching stories, and only now was living one. Then Madison stepped forward. She held a file in her hands, Cooper's shelter intake form. She showed it to the crowd, the words Golden Retriever, Male, no name printed across the top. "This is how he arrived," she said. No chip, no tag, just fear in his eyes and a limp in his step. But behind that, something else. Something we almost missed. She turned to the crowd voice, steady. "Animals don't speak the way we do, but they remember, they hope, and sometimes they forgive more than we deserve." She closed the folder and smiled. "I work with animals who have known nothing but loss, and yet they still lean in when someone reaches out. That's what Cooper did. And that's what he taught us." Near the front row, a small hand rose. It belonged to Ava Millstone, age 9, with red hair in twin braids and freckles scattered like stars across her nose. She sat beside her mother, a tall, thin woman with tired eyes and a soft smile. Laura, recently divorced, recently returned to Willow Creek after 10 years away. "Does Cooper like hugs?" Ava asked. The crowd chuckled. Harold knelt beside his dog. "He does Ava, especially from brave girls." Ava approached slowly, and as she reached out, Cooper leaned forward, pressing his head gently into her side. The crowd melted. Later that day, under the canopy near the adoption pens, Claire, Whitmore, and Madison greeted families interested in rescue pets. Luna, the shy border collie, Harold had bonded with, wagged her tail for the first time as a boy in a wheelchair named Jonas reached out to her. Moose, the terrier, barked in delight as someone tossed a toy. An elderly woman stood nearby, leaning heavily on a cherrywood cane. She wore a thick cardigan and a brooch shaped like a fox. Her name was Irene Beck, and she had lived in Willow Creek for longer than almost anyone remembered. Widowed twice, she rarely left her home. But today she walked slowly up to Madison. "I came here to donate blankets." She said, "I wasn't planning on staying." Madison smiled. "We're glad you did." Irene's eyes settled on Cooper now, lying under a shady tree. "That dog," she whispered. "If he can learn to love again, maybe I can too." Madison didn't reply. She simply placed a hand over Irene's and squeezed gently. By sundown, 9 animals had been adopted. Dozens of applications were pending. The shelter booth overflowed with donations. But more than that, more than numbers or headlines, something deeper shifted in Willow Creek. As people packed up, Harold sat beside Madison on the bench near the stage, the grass warm beneath their feet. "You're a good speaker," she said. "You're a better one," he replied. They watched Cooper snooze in the soft light, paws twitching slightly this time, not in fear, but perhaps in dream. Madison tilted her head. "You ever think about writing all this down? What happened with Cooper?" Harold chuckled. "It's being written already. Every morning when he wakes up and still chooses to stay close." They sat in companionable silence, and the town, like the dog who had become its quiet miracle, began to heal. Late summer in Willow Creek arrived with a hush rather than a flourish. The trees had only begun their subtle shift toward amber, and the breeze carried a faint chill that hinted of what was to come. In the heart of town, the public library, an old red-brick building, with ivy climbing up one side, and a weather vane shaped like an owl had come to life in a new way. A banner hung outside the entrance strung between 2 maples. Paws and Pages, Reading with Rescues, hosted by Harold Bennett and Dr. Madison Keene. Inside, the children's section had been transformed. Beanbags and fleece rugs dotted the floor. A shelf labeled Dog-Approved Stories featured books with titles like Because of Winn-Dixie and the Incredible Journey. The scent of old pages mingled with the cleaner scent of shampooed dog fur. Harold sat in a deep leather armchair by the wide front windows, Cooper lying at his feet. The golden retriever, now fully restored in both health and spirit, rested with his head on his paws, ears flicking gently as a little girl's voice filled the room. Across from Harold Ava Millstone now, 10 and a little taller, read aloud from a picture book. Her words were confident, her cheeks flushed with purpose. And the dog said, Ava paused dramatically, "You don't need to be perfect to be loved." Beside her, another child giggled. Jonas, the boy in the wheelchair who had adopted Luna. The border collie held a chew toy in his lap. Luna curled faithfully beside his chair. He hadn't spoken much in the months following his father's deployment, but now, during these reading sessions, he read whole paragraphs loudly, proudly. In the back of the room, Madison Keene smiled as she rearranged a basket of dog treats and books. She had moved 6 months ago into a cottage just up the hill from Harold's, a small cream-colored house with a wraparound porch and a direct path to the lake. There she had opened Heart to Paw, rescue and recovery now. A sanctuary for dogs who needed longer healing, those who weren't adoptable by quick standards but had stories waiting to unfold. She wore her favorite denim shirt, rolled at the sleeves, and canvas sneakers. Her hair pulled back with a faded scarf that once belonged to her mother. Time in Willow Creek had softened the tension in her shoulders, replaced her cautious gait with the kind of quiet rootedness that comes from building something you believe in. Madison Ava called from across the room. "Can Cooper do tricks?" "Only the ones that involve stealing my socks," Madison said. Walking over, Harold chuckled. "But he'll sit and stay if you bribe him with enough liver treats." As the children continued reading, Cooper perked up and stood stretching with a groan before padding over to Jonas. The boy gently rested his hand on the dog's head. The moment was simple, but sacred. After the session ended, parents trickled in to collect their children, exchanging hugs and thanks. Harold stepped outside for a moment, the late sunlight casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Cooper followed and lay under the bench near the library garden, where bees hovered lazily over the last blooms of summer. "Hard to believe," Harold murmured, watching a boy skip stones across the sidewalk, "that a year ago I thought I'd never see him again." Madison joined him, a to-go cup in hand. "You didn't just get him back, Harold. You brought half the town back with him." They sat in companionable silence until a small white dog trotted by on a leash held by a teenager in a varsity jacket. It was Bailey, a senior Maltese adopted by Sarah Kim, a soft-spoken girl with long dark hair who had once been too anxious to leave her house alone. Now she volunteered weekly at Heart to Paw and planned to become a vet tech. Bailey barked at Cooper once cheerfully, and Cooper gave a lazy wag of his tail. "Everyone's found a new rhythm," Madison said. "Even the dogs." "You included?" Harold asked. Madison looked out at the horizon. "Yeah, I think so. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm rebuilding. I feel like I'm just living." At the lake that evening, the three of them, Harold, Madison, and Cooper, walked down the hill behind Madison's cottage. The sun dipped low, casting long ribbons of orange across the water. Dragonflies skimmed the surface and the pine trees whispered overhead. Madison had set up a small dock with 2 chairs and a cooler between them. Cooper lay at the edge, chin resting over the boards, watching fish dart beneath the surface. They sat for a while, drinking ginger beer, and listening to the soft splash of waves. "You ever think about writing a book?" Madison asked. Harold smirked. "About what?" "About him," she said, nodding toward Cooper. About all of this, Harold considered it. "Maybe, but I'd want to end it right where we are, not with a grand farewell or some moral tied up in a bow." Just this moment, Madison leaned back. That would be enough. As the last light of day stretched across the lake, Cooper rose and walked between them, resting his head on Madison's knee and pressing his flank gently against Harold's leg. The gesture said what words didn't have to. He was home. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly on four legs with tired eyes and a heart still willing to trust. Harold thought he had lost everything: his beloved dog, his purpose, his connection to the world. But what he didn't know, what none of us can fully grasp, is that when we believe all is lost, God is often just beginning to write the second chapter. Cooper's return wasn't just a reunion. It was a reminder that healing takes time, that love can be resurrected, and that even broken hearts can beat stronger when surrounded by grace. In a world that often moves too fast to notice the quiet ones, this story whispers, there is no such thing as being too late for redemption. Maybe you've lost something. Maybe you've been waiting like Harold did for a sign that it's not over. This is that sign. Let this be your gentle reminder that God works through second chances, through unexpected encounters, and yes, even through a dog who never stopped loving his person. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to believe in hope again. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and if you feel moved, write Amen, as a small prayer for every heart still waiting for a miracle. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, and may God bless you and your loved ones with peace, strength, and the quiet kind of love that never gives up.